Is Superman the most iconic hero in our culture? He is one of the most recognized symbols worldwide, and his adventures have inspired hundreds of superheroes and several fictional universes since the 1940s. If that's true, why is making a good movie about such a popular character so difficult? That was the question I asked myself on September 9th, 2017 as these video essays began. By then, movies like Bryan Singer's Superman Returns or Zack Snyder's Man of Steel had received mixed reviews, since neither of them seemed to meet the expectations of the audience or the critics. Today, we already have another Superman movie. Although this movie was well received by critics, did well at the box office, and pleased some viewers, another group of fans remains unconvinced. No matter which Man of Steel version or approach you pick, there's always a but. Why? Here I'll tell you, because today I'm going to revisit some parts of my 2017 video essay and complement it with information from the new movie. I'll switch to Superman expert mode to answer, why is making a good Superman movie so difficult? Let's get started. The Monitor and Chapter 1. An impossible choice. Most writers who work on Superman are forced to go down one of two paths, each with its own advantages and disadvantages. One option is to honor Superman's classic traits. This is the case with the 2006 film Superman Returns starring Brandon Routh, which was praised by critics at the time. Despite its nostalgic tone reminiscent of the Christopher Reeve movies and character portrayal, this film had several issues. I might sound old, but I was 19 when I saw Superman Returns in theaters. I remember being really excited to see a Superman movie in the theater for the first time. And I kept replaying the trailer over and over again on the slow early 2000s internet. Because I loved the concept of the movie it presented, where supposedly we would see Superman return after many years to a world that seemed to have moved on without him. I especially loved how iconic elements were fused with things I'd never seen in a movie. John Williams' classic theme played during our epic battle with Lex Luthor. At the same time, in the trailer we saw that Lois no longer trusted the Man of Steel, and we saw a Clark Kent who was unsure about his role as Superman. And when I went to see the movie at the theater, I remember that I did enjoy it, but I didn't leave with that feeling of, I have to see it again in the theater. I think it's because the film drops the idea of Superman returning to a world that moved on without him too quickly, as after a single rescue, most people instantly welcome him back. The film becomes more of a tribute to the classic Christopher Reeve movies than something new, and Lex Luthor is once again obsessed with a real estate scheme. In the end, he's defeated due to a clumsy henchman's intervention, elements we also saw in the new film. Though critics praised it, it didn't resonate with audiences in 2006. Maybe it's because it tries too hard to mimic an older film, or because audiences didn't want such a flawless character then. And here we have to talk about something very important. Superman has changed a lot over the years, which means that these classic characteristics we know about the character may not have always been there. Superman was most popular with people in the late 1930s and early 1940s, a time when the United States was immersed in World War II. That's why children then wanted to read optimistic stories with perfect characters who gave them hope for a better future beyond war and dictators. This approach of an optimistic, bright, flawless Superman. They adapted it for the Superman movie with Christopher Reeve, and it was very successful in the 1970s. Why was it so effective? Well, besides the fact that the execution of the movie was beautiful, it represented exactly what was culturally expected of Superman. At that time, that is in 1978, when the movie was originally released. Even though the comics had already shown a more thoughtful Superman, increasingly questioning his role in the world. The general public still thought of Superman as this unstoppable force for good, an optimist who always knew and did what was right. Adapting him this way, as in the stories from the 40s and 50s, was once the right choice, but that's no longer true. In 2006, when the wounds of September 11 were still fresh, the audience may not have related to this fantastic world, where people instantly trusted a powerful man from space. A second way to adapt Superman was what we saw in the movie Man of Steel. In this film, the idea was to show us a Superman with flaws. He doubts his place in the world and is just starting to accept being a hero even though he doesn't know how. That approach is much like what we saw in Martin Scorsese's film The Last Temptation of Christ, where the goal is also to humanize a divine figure. I remember getting really excited and watching the trailer repeatedly when it came out. Now I can do it with better internet. Nowadays, this darker and more contemplative approach to Superman is heavily criticized. Remember, in 2013, this kind of adaptation hadn't been done before, especially outside comics or in movies. Were there no other versions featuring a dark Superman like The Boys or Invincible? In 2013, midnight premieres weren't very popular yet, but my partner and I still went. We went to see the movie at a theater called Cinemark, a franchise that doesn't even exist here in Mexico anymore. I remember I had an amazing time at that screening. Especially with the first flight scene, which to this day is one of my favorite scenes in all superhero movies. I naively thought it was going to be like a kind of Dark Knight. I mean, that almost everyone was going to like it. The next day I checked social media and saw the reviews were mixed. It wasn't the home run I expected. Scenes like Jonathan Kent advising Clark not to save the kids or Zod's death at Cal's hands. These factors didn't resonate with many as they felt it betrayed the character's essence. So, notice what happens at this point. In 7 years, we had 2 new Superman franchises with very different approaches and criticisms. On one hand, Superman Returns showed a classic approach that critics liked, but it didn't connect with people. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Man of Steel had a much more groundbreaking premise, which didn't connect with some critics nor with some of the fans. Partly because it felt too far removed from the character's most iconic traits. This shows that, beyond the typical movie challenges, strong script, performances, coherence, etc., the Superman movies struggled to balance classic and modern elements when updating the character. Choosing a completely classic story could result in something dull that fails to connect with today's audience. However, choosing something edgier risks moving too far from what people expect of the character. I repeat, besides the typical movie challenges, why does this only happen with Superman and not Batman or other superheroes? For example, that's an interesting question, right? But before we continue, let me ask you something. Would you like to go to a Superman-themed event with only Superman fans? On Saturday the 13th, I'll have an event at Cinedot Azcapotzalco, Mexico City. Here we're going to get together to watch James Gunn's Superman movie, obviously, with an awesome combo of large popcorn, a large soda, and nachos. I'll give a talk on the Man of Steel's history afterward. And we'll finish with a meet and greet where we can talk, take pictures, and hang out with other Superman fans. We'll also bring new channel t-shirts if you're interested. It's just one event which is already filling up. So if you're interested in attending, reserve your spot at the link I left in the video description. Hurry up, the date is soon and I'd be happy to see you there. Now back to the topic. Chapter 2. The Perks of Invisibility. If you ask anyone on the street, what is Superman like? Everyone will give you a clear answer, but that longtime comic fan might provide a more detailed one. But I'm sure your grandma and anyone else who might not be so familiar with these fictional worlds will also give you just as clear an answer. He's such a big character that everyone has their own idea of him and wants to be right. Not all superheroes experience this, for example. Much of the Marvel Cinematic Universe characters' success is due to many people not knowing their comic personalities before the movies. So the directors of these films had a lot of freedom when dealing with these characters because the general public didn't have any expectations of them. Entire themes, like the Guardians of the Galaxy, differ greatly from their comic versions up to that point. Because what James Gunn did in this case was take the characters, alter their personalities and even the lore to make them work in a film adaptation, something that worked tremendously well, but this is something that would be very difficult to do with Superman. Why? Because it turns out he goes beyond popularity. Let's look at it this way. Even though characters like Spider-Man or Batman generate more revenue than the Man of Steel, we usually consider Superman as the greatest hero of all. Partly because he embodies an archetype, a mold others follow. That's why, basically, in every superhero universe, from Marvel to My Hero Academia, we have at least one character who takes several elements from Superman and adapts them to their own narrative. Importantly, Batman carries the same cultural weight as Superman. But his case is slightly different since the vast majority of people agree that a Batman movie should have dark tones, twisted and sinister villains, and themes related to detective and mystery stories. That doesn't mean they're the only Batman stories that exist, since the character also has a streak of camp aesthetics which is completely valid and canonical for the character. But in general, most people agree that they want to see a dark Batman in the movies, so his films haven't had much controversy. In terms of what kind of approach is given to him, something that doesn't happen with Superman? Some people want more classic qualities while others prefer a darker approach. As seen in comics like Injustice or Red Zone, stories have placed the character in very different situations, which felt like a fresh, appealing approach at the time. Yes, I know Injustice is heavily criticized now, mainly because many fans treat it as the definitive version of the characters. At the time, it was new and attracted more people to comics. These alternate stories cleverly showed us Superman without making him exactly Superman, which really resonated with people. The issue is that movies don't work the same way. Since even though these are clearly alternate storylines that have nothing to do with the main comic continuity, many people often view them as absolute truths about the character. So every piece of lore presented in these movies is discussed in depth to see if it's valid or not, or if it fits with our personal and subjective view of the character or not. Don't just view these movies as a reinterpretation of the character, since we all have our own vision of Superman. One that can be based on what we read in the comics, what we saw in old cartoons, or in our own personal interpretation. A vision that often changes from person to person, so unifying all those visions into a single movie can be extremely complicated. So what are we left with then? I want to discuss how comics approach this problem. And now finally talk about how the movie Superman by James Gunn tackled this challenge. Now, speaking seriously and leaving the jokes aside, Mark Waid, a true Superman expert, claims he's read every comic, watched all cartoons, series, and movies, and listened to every radio show about the character. But there was a moment in his career when he faced a real challenge. In the early 2000s, Detective Comics planned a new Superman origin story set in the 21st century, one that a new generation of readers could relate to and understand. Mark Waid was selected to write this story, but his editors surprised him with a question: why does Superman choose to do good? At first he hesitated and gave the lamest answer in the world. He told him, well, because it's the right thing to do, to which his editor replied, do they pay you to have better answers than that? Waid then began to research the old Superman stories, since he was determined to find the answers in the hero's past. To find that clue that was always there that would tell him why Superman behaves the way he does and that maybe he had overlooked. I mean, why would he care about us right now? Mark Waid discovered the key. Superman is not human. This is when Waid began to apply it to the character. Something called Maslow's pyramid, which is a theory that says human beings have 5 types of needs. Physical needs like eating and sleeping are at the pyramid's base, with more complex needs higher up. Like the need to feel safe, to have friends, good self-esteem, and at the top is the need to feel self-fulfilled. This theory states you must meet lower needs before accessing higher ones. Although Superman isn't human, see how this theory was applied to him. For Waid, Superman would automatically have most of his needs met, since Kal-El is a human battery who feeds on the rays of the sun and also has a loving family. What does Clark need to be accepted? Something he can't do as Clark Kent, because he spends his life trying to go unnoticed. So, according to Waid's theory, what he really needs is to use his abilities in order to feel fulfilled. The result then was the comic Birthright, in my opinion, the best origin story of the character, since it tells us about a Clark full of doubts. Gradually he realizes he must use his powers and the morality his human parents taught him to help others and feel authentic. And when you put these two elements together, Kryptonian power and human morality, well, the figure of Superman starts to make a lot more sense. This is how we relate to him, understanding his struggles and needs, beyond simply admiring his feats and powers. Something that clearly isn't going to happen. All of this shows up dating Superman is difficult. Simply making him a blogger or television journalist isn't enough. Modernizing Superman on film requires a deeper look at his motivations. So a new movie lets us see a classic story in a whole new way. How did James Gunn do? In my Superman talks, I often say I love him. Even though we've had so many different versions and adaptations of the character over the years, James Gunn managed to give us yet another one, something we hadn't seen until then. Pay close attention, James Gunn's Superman. Though it shares classic elements with Christopher Reeves like optimism and soundtrack, it still feels very different. Because he's much more emotional than any other version we've seen of him. We actually saw this in the trailers during his awkward chat with Lois Lane. But I think where we see this most at play is in my favorite scene of the movie. Superman's speech to Lex Luthor was my favorite scene, as it truly reveals this new Superman's approach.
That's where you've always misunderstood me, Lex.
I'm more human than anyone I love. I get scared, I regret things all the time, but that's what it means to be human.
Someone behind the cameras explains how the magic in this scene truly happened. David Corenswet and James Gunn said they had already filmed this scene several times with good results. David, still unconvinced, requested a break and discussed with James what his character was truly feeling then. And this is when they reached this point.
Feelings about feeling bad are okay.
I love this because this Superman, unlike earlier versions, isn't afraid to be human and emotionally vulnerable. Notice how versions like Reeves or Cavill's brought a different, perhaps more existential emotion. Is being Superman or a god among humans the heavier burden or more mythical emotion? But we don't see him display everyday emotions as much as David Corensway's Superman. He cares about others' opinions, how he's perceived, and even the ridicule he gets online.
To talk about how it's okay to be vulnerable, you have to be vulnerable, which means showing Lex that his feelings are there.
This describes a Superman who resonates more with today's generation, where it's increasingly normal for men. Let's talk about our emotions. The same happens with Lex Luthor, who says at one point that he knows exactly why he hates Superman. We're discussing a Lex who recognized the source of his hatred and chose to embrace it, a very self-aware Lex Luthor. Which makes this speech feel so emotional. Because even though we don't have Superman's powers, we can certainly empathize with the way the Man of Steel is dealing with his problems. I believe this version of Superman resonated with today's audience, especially those who never connected with earlier versions. But it's also why many others are rejecting this version. We often see social media comments saying this Superman is too weak or whiny. This makes sense, as many still believe it's wrong for men, especially strong or heroic figures like Superman, to discuss or show their emotions. It's like a lot of people still have the idea that there's a right way and a wrong way to express emotions socially. For example, many believe it's better to express them more contemplatively, like Cavill. So, we still have the same problem. James Gunn's Superman appeals to and connects with one segment of the population, but not with another. This, in addition to the fact that there's also a whole problem with the Superman fandom. Some prefer the Snyderverse, others the Detective Comics universe. Is there a solution to this issue? I feel like it's complicated given the nature of the character because, as I said, each of us has an idea of how Superman should be. Each of us believes we're right. And it's also true that throughout history there have been many canonical or official versions of Superman that appeal more to one type of fan than another. So anyone can take the version they like the most and make it their own, even discarding all the others. Personally, I believe that the character can and should take on different forms and different nuances. And I love analyzing all these new versions to find out how the character keeps reinventing and updating himself for new audiences. Beyond how powerful, emotional, or contemplative he is, I think something unites all versions of Superman. Because for me, it has to be a character who always puts the needs of others before his own. A character who always tries to do what's right. I understand that in a world where we're used to corruption or seeing the powerful oppress others, Superman may seem absurd, but he represents an ideal to strive for, an ideal we create. So for me, more than anything else, Superman represents that secret desire we have for the world. But sometimes we're too shy to admit it. Remember that there are still some spots left for the event I'll have with Cinedot where we'll watch the Superman movie together.